Welcome to another episode of Off the Menu. I'm Vincent Franchini from Tumblr House, here with a donut-starved Charles Coulombe.
Donut-starved?
Yeah.
You're saying that just because I haven't had donuts since I left the good old US of A, I'm starved for them.
Well, this is inspired by, so I was eating a donut before the pre-show. And
yes, you were.
When Charles is over in the Tumblr House Tower studio, I generally give him a donut, and he is very fond of donuts.
I am.
So I was enjoying a donut on the pre-show or before the pre-show as we were warming up, and just Charles's mouth was salivating. I mean,
it's true. I do miss donuts very much. Although I've just found out, because I was forced to look into it, they have a Dunkin' Donuts here in Vienna. So I've got to go find it out.
Well, yeah. Well, you weren't forced to look into it. I think out of sheer desperation, you looked into it because I asked you if they had donuts in Europe, and then you initially said no. And I said, how could that be?
They didn't, actually, for years and years. They have them now, apparently. So the American way of life is not just to be seen in pornography and gay marriage.
I don't know if that's fair to...
What?
I mean...
We have other things in gay marriage and pornography.
I know, but that sort of casts a bad light on donuts. Guilty by association.
No! Well, we have cocktails, too. And the Europeans didn't have those. What? I mean, 20 years ago, you couldn't get a good cocktail in London to save your life. Except at the Savoy.
I don't understand how that can be possible. Can you unpack that?
Nothing to unpack. I mean, they just didn't make cocktails. You had whiskey, you had gin, but you wouldn't have a Bloody Mary. You wouldn't have an Old Fashioned. You wouldn't have had anything like that.
I mean, is that really...
That's American.
But I mean, an old fashioned, like let's say an old fashioned, what you put a sugar and a cherry in there. That's not that big of a. I mean, it seems so confined.
They wouldn't have done it. You would have had whiskey and water, whiskey and soda. If you were, most places didn't have ice cubes, so you could have whiskey neat and water back. That's what you'd have. Or you could have gin and tonic. Okay. They had ice, would go with the gin and tonic usually. Have gin and tonic. You could have, they didn't even do highballs. They could have, but they didn't. And they certainly didn't have Bloody Marys or anything like that. Mimosas and that kind of thing. And you had beer of innumerable kinds, all served warm. And they had wines, and that was it.
Gosh, I don't know. I just feel like my image of Europe has irrevocably changed because how could you be that slow on donuts and cocktails?
Well, they just were. And one of the things you'll find is that most cities in Europe, Paris, Vienna, Rome, Venice, London, would have a place called the American Bar. And that was inevitably where you went in the good old days if you wanted to go for real cocktails.
Well, see, that's... Okay.
The cocktail actually came to Europe in the wake of World War I.
Well, that makes sense.
Well, the reason for that was that there were a lot of American expatriates over here.
Yeah.
And, they all wanted their booze, especially bearing in mind that Prohibition was going on in the States.
But see, I guess why I'm so bewildered, it's like the story you told me where one of your good Irish friends came over and went to a Winchell's Donuts and had a donut for the first time. And he simply was confounded and bewildered how they didn't have donuts in Ireland. Like, it was so good. How can we not do this? And so I guess that's the same sort of impulse I'm feeling right now. Like, how can that be if it's that good?
Well, you got to remember, too, it was 20 years ago.
So?
Well, 20 years ago, all the countries of Europe were rather less American than they are now.
But see, that's a cultural thing. Just because you're not American doesn't mean. I mean, taste buds don't work like that, do they?
Oh, they sure do. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff in America. I mean, so there's stuff here I can't get in America. You know what I always miss when I'm in the States?
What, bratwurst? I don't know.
No, a ton of things actually, but Austrian whipped cream.
Okay, how is that different from Cool
It's
Whip?
not a petroleum product like ours.
A petroleum product?
Like Vaseline. The stuff that comes out of the tube we call whipped cream.
I don't like your portrayal of our whipped cream.
Well, it's what it is. But the whipped cream here is real whipped cream, as in heavy cream that's been beaten.
We have heavy cream here.
Yeah, but we don't use it this way. And their whipped cream is so good and so tasty. They don't have the artificial petroleum product that we use.
You're ruining whipped cream for me.
Well, maybe you need to taste the real thing so that it can be ruined for you properly. Or, as one kind of obnoxious British commentator says, sometimes you have to get sick before you can get better.
Sometimes you have to destroy a city to save a city.
Exactly. Now you're cooking with gas.
Oh, okay. So anyhow, Charles is donut starved, and I sadistically ate a donut in front of him.
Gleefully is the phrase you want.
Gleefully, yeah. So, okay.
I'll get back at you one
day. So other than
see.
being donut starved, how are you doing?
Well, the light is at the end of the tunnel. On May 15th, the restaurants reopen. We still have to wear our masks running around, but the thing that kind of makes me laugh is that homemade masks and scarves are acceptable. Those won't stop the coronavirus.
Well, I was listening to this, and apparently it doesn't protect you; it protects the other person by catching the big particle matter.
I've heard just the opposite. Personally, I think it makes people feel good about themselves. I think there's a certain amount of virtue signaling. Don't get me wrong; I'm not a medical specialist by any means, but what I've read, which and everybody's read something, so it doesn't privilege something just because I've read it.
Yeah.
It could still be a crock. I don't know, but it just seems to me that if you're getting a rush of good feeling out of being locked down, like you're somehow being virtuous, there's a problem. Especially if feeling virtuous doing it yourself, you begin to feel like going on a crusade against others who aren't.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying.
I can't even look at Twitter anymore. I'm almost going to deactivate my Twitter because everyone, oh gosh.
Well, everyone's so crazy about it because if you're in favor of locking down, you're obviously a sellout to the globalist international conspiracy.
Yeah.
And if you're against locking down, you obviously want everyone to die horribly.
Yeah.
And the fact that in all likelihood, nobody really knows what we're doing, and we just hope for the best. And we have a leadership class that have never had a real challenge before, so they're falling back on movies themselves. I was having a discussion with my brother last night, actually. Seeing the world's leadership today is like watching little kids in their daddy's suits. They're just They don't know what they're doing. And they act very pompous and, oh, well, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And maybe it'll work. Maybe not. Who knows? I don't. I know that it will certainly be better for social, what's the word I want? For social peace, if the majority of people feel that at the end of the day, all of this was worth it. And it will not be very good for social tranquility if a lot of people feel that it wasn't worth it.
I think somebody actually said something interesting on Twitter.
It does happen.
I don't know if it was Paul Joseph Watson or somebody, but he said, this is totally changing our mindset in I don't know if he said not perverse way, but skewed way, where we think we're beating the plague, like as in the Black Plague.
Yeah.
Which I guess he felt, this is nothing like.
No.
So
if this was the plague, a lot more people would be dead, no matter what you did.
Yeah.
But but it is the first big challenge that this generation of leaders has ever really faced. And I don't think they know anymore what to do about it. The rest of us do. And they take recommendations based upon recommendations.
Science. Because science is going to lead the way. Science will lead us out of this.
Except that science is constantly contradicting itself, and who the devil knows what any of it means. They're basically looking to science for the kind of legitimacy that 200 years ago rulers looked to religion for. The problem is that science is not in the business of giving definitive answers to anything. Science should be in the business of asking questions. And I'll take this a step further. I find it a bit chilling, in a sense, that everything has become so politicized that if you're quote-unquote conservative or quote-unquote right-wing, you absolutely have to be against all these measures. And if you consider yourself liberal or quote-unquote left-wing, then you have to be in favor of them.
That got me wondering for what this would be like, what the party lines would be if Obama was the president right now. You see what I'm saying? Would it still be like this?
I don't know. And of course, the funny thing is that, as I've said before, I'll say it again, the Trumpster has very intelligently kept himself out of the main line of fire by, as the Constitution would require, letting the governors determine policy. But of course, he's financing everything, and I happily got my $1,200 check from the government, by the way. So I've given up my libertarian status. But what? Oh, just because I never had any.
Well, everybody knows it's easy to pay you off, Charles. To buy you off. Yeah.
Yeah, you bet. And you know what? I'm not one of these sticks in the mud, these people who are so rigid, that they'll stay bought. No. I'm much more fluid than that. I'm much more flexible. You got more money or more whatever it is than the last guy that bought me off, you got a deal, pal.
That's smart.
And if you don't have a deal with me, I can make a few calls. Maybe get you in touch with someone you can make a deal with. You don't know. I don't know. We'll find out. I'm not guaranteeing anything, of course. I'm not in the business of guarantees. I'm in the business of making things happen. There's a difference. It's about dynamism, not being static.
Dynamism. What the hell? What does that mean?
It means moving forward. It means not being stuck in yesterday's payoff.
Oh, okay.
It means looking forward to the next big payoff. It means the movement of the dialectic through history.
What does that mean?
It's what the Marxists say. If it's good enough for the Marxists to say it, I can say it. The movement of the dialectic through history.
Okay.
What?
Okay, is there anything else? Anything else you want to rant about? Or
yes, I do.
Okay.
I do. We're doing this show on Saturday night. They're going to see it Monday. But between those 2 days lies a roaring maw of a day. Mother's Day.
Yeah.
You forgot, didn't you?
No, I didn't. Because
you're not going to take your mother out anywhere, are you? Yeah, didn't think so, smart guy. After all she did for you, you're not going to take her anywhere.
Oh, so I see. So you want me to take my mom out to a restaurant so she dies? You want to kill her with coronavirus? That's what you want? Yeah. Oh, you don't care about my mom at all. You don't care about
return.
My mom. Yeah.
Good return. But it is Mother's Day, so let's give a shout out to all them mums out there.
Yeah. Shout out to the moms.
What's more with feeling?
Shout out to the moms.
There we go. The mamas and the papas.
Yeah,
all the leaves are brown. No? See, the problem for you is that you're just not surrealistic enough to deal with today's atmosphere. You need more surrealism in your life. It would help. A more surrealistic manner is what you need. I always think of Bonnie Callahan's great statement, which was actually stolen from Lord of the Rings and repurposed.
Okay.
She said, just as Frodo said to the elf, "Go not to the elves for counsel, for they shall say both yes and no." Bonnie said, "Go not to the surrealists for counsel, for they shall say both blue and hippopotamus."
Who was name some surrealists other than Salvador Dali.
Buñuel.
What did he do?
He was a filmmaker. And there's a bunch of other people who, Man Ray, there's a name for you. Gosh, there was a surrealist movie that came out in the 40s. I wish I could remember the name of it. It's pretty surreal. Dreams That Money Can Buy.
Okay.
You want surreal, you watch that film.
Okay, so
but
that's
be
it?
warned.
I mean,
what's
really?
that?
That's it? It doesn't seem like a big movement to me.
It's big enough. It's just I can't remember. Was it Jacques Loti? Was another one? And of course, Picasso was something of a surrealist.
How is that?
Just by being who he was and what he was. But the surrealists, Dali was really the king of the surrealists.
Yeah.
He really was. And he was very fond of my Aunt Jenny.
Dali, he has, everyone mostly knows his famous paintings, but Solange Hertz actually pointed out one, he did a Last Supper.
He sure did.
And it's the wildest Last Supper, and it's so interesting. It takes your mind into such an interesting place.
Yeah, and yet it's reverent.
It is reverent. I highly recommend everybody, look it up. Yeah. So.
Well, I mean, or his crucifixion, which is also weird.
I didn't see his crucifixion. Oh gosh, I got to look.
It's got it from the heaven's eye view, looking down, and you see the planet Earth under the cross. I mean, it's. Yeah, he was, and it's not surreal in the sense that the style is almost photographic. So, Anyway.
Yeah.
But enough of this falderall. What kind of questions we got?
Well, before we get to the questions, we have
Do we have memes in production?
No memes. I'm sorry, Charles. No memes today, but we have something better. We have a message from a top floor executive, Jonathan.
Wow.
There's a message for everybody. He says, "Dear Mr. Charles and Mr. Franchini, you have always answered my questions well to my satisfaction. My money is well spent, 10 out of 10. The merchandise or swag from Teespring is awesome. I've never had cooler pillows. The Carry-On Sacre-Coeur.
Huh.
And, let me show the other pillow. Habsburg.
Oh, cozy.
Yeah. Oh, you want to talk about cozy.
Always. Oh.
So soft. This is one of the softest blankets. Let's see here. Yeah. So,
gosh, I can still remember your dad wrapped in that thing.
Oh, yeah. So I've never had cooler pillows, and the Habsburg blanket is top-notch. Not only in comfort, but in warmth, but also in looks. Another 10 out of 10. And available at our Teespring store. If you want to buy, the link is in the summary of this video, or the description of this video. Jonathan ends with, he says, "Lastly, a word to all you non-patrons. You can get in on the action of the pre-show for as low as $1. You also get discounts, early access to the show, and if you have a question for Mr. Charles, they put those questions at great value. Most importantly, you get to support this show and help Mr. Franchini get his surf and turf back.
Yay.
God bless you all."
Yay, yay, yay.
Wow. So, from this message, I think the audience can understand and appreciate the quality of top floor executives now, the heroic virtue they exhibit, their wisdom, their intelligence, their generosity, and most importantly, their good taste. See, not everyone can be a top floor executive.
No, that's true. It takes money.
Yeah, and so, if you're interested in all these benefits, sign up for as low as $1. You know, it's been tough for me, Charles. You know, Lent is over, but I still have not been able to resume the surf and turf. And
it's because of the lockdown.
Yeah, so the champagne, the caviar, the lobster just kind of is nothing without that filet mignon, you know? It just sort of like nice. Ashes in your mouth, you know? So let's get that fund higher. Let's get going so I can resume a state of normality, shall we say.
So what you're telling me is that you're going back to surf and turf is absolutely essential to the country reopening.
It absolutely is. What's good for Tumler House is good for the nation. You've got the comforts of business, of doing business at Tumler House gets the wheels in my mind turning. It opens up the avenues of my mind, the highways of my mind.
The windmills of your mind.
Oh, that's a little too archaic. But a windmill, that's kind of insulting. This slow-moving windmill. I don't like that.
No, it's not insulting. Hold on. Let me explain.
Dutch. I don't like that.
Well, it may be Dutch, but actually the windmills of your mind have a very important point, really. You see, Windmills of Your Mind is actually a song from 1969. And its lyrics speak, I think, to who we were at that point. You'll find, and I think you'll agree with me when you've heard them, these lyrics speak to who we were then and who we've become as a people, as a generation, as a nation. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Round like a circle in a spiral, like a wheel within a wheel, never ending or beginning at an ever spinning reel, like a snowball down a mountain or a carnival balloon, like a carousel that's turning, running rings around the moon, like a clock whose hands are sweeping past the minutes of its face, and the world is like an apple whirling silently in space, like the circles that you find in the windmills of your mind. Like a tunnel that you follow to a tunnel of its own, down a hollow to a cavern where the sun has never shone. Like a door that keeps revolving in a half-forgotten dream, or the ripples from a pebble someone tosses in a stream. Like a clock whose hands are sweeping past the minutes of its face, and the world is like an apple whirling silently in space, like the circles that you find in the windmills of your mind. Do you understand now?
That is so incredibly profound. I'm going to meditate on that and really soak it up, soak it in all day.
You bet. You bet. It's a song that speaks to us who we are and where we were. Okay. Maybe not. What else we got? What's going on?
Let's go on to... Oh, wait. I should also say, please subscribe to the channel. It's free. Just click that button on the bottom right corner of your screen. And if you like our shows, please click like. Do it.
Yes, indeedio.
Okay. Let's start the questions. We have a bunch of questions from a gentleman named Kentucky Traditionalist.
Okay.
I think it's a he. Okay. He says, I'm a questioning Protestant looking to convert to the true Church of Christ. This has been a years-long journey of both questioning the denomination I was raised in, as well as Christianity itself, and finally discovering the truth of the Catholic faith. While I mostly came to this conclusion on my own, this show has been great at reinforcing this decision, so thank you. How good are RCIA classes? Would you recommend them? I hear many of them have gotten rather flabby. Are there ways of coming into the church without going through the RCIA program?
Well, I might know somebody. Let me make a few calls. No.
Yeah, the black market for...
The black market baptisms. Wow. That's right, black market receptions. It's all the rage. No, well, I'll tell you, Kentucky. The RCIA is, as you divide, often pretty flabby. A lot depends on which parish is giving it, who they are, what they are. So, FSSP, that's Fraternity of St. Peter, and FSSP and Christ the King priests will give you old-style receptions into the church. The SSPX will do the same. The Eastern Rites, if you go that way, will do it that way. So will the Ordinarians. But let's say you want to look for an RCIA in a parish. Well, you got to look for everything else that's going on in the parish. Do they have perpetual adoration? What sort of liturgy do they have? You know, if they've got a Latin Mass, even a Latin Novus Ordo, if they've got a good a traditional style music program, these are possible things. Ask to see the book.
What?
You know, ask to see what book they're using at the RCIA.
Oh.
But a lot also depends on geography. Now, in Kentucky, there are certain areas that are very Catholic. There are areas that have very few Catholics. You may not have a choice, but you must come into the church. You really must. So, if you've got a very flabby RCIA thing going on, then I would do two things. I wouldn't bring it to the attention of the people teaching it that it's flabby, because they generally do not appreciate constructive criticism of any kind. But what I would do is get a hold of the Catechism of the Council of Trent, and the Catechism of the Catholic Church. I'd read Trent first. I'd read the CCC second. Where the CCC differs from Trent, in a few places, disregard it.
Yeah.
And then do whatever rigmarole you got to go through until they receive you.
Yeah, that's the price of admission.
Yep. I wish it was wonderful and perfect, but it's not.
Yeah. Okay, Kentucky Traditionalist has a bunch of other related questions that we're going to get into. He says the denomination I was raised was developed from the so-called Stone-Campbell Restoration Movement. If you're familiar with this movement and the denominations it spawned, would you please explain it to the audience so they'll understand where I'm coming from?
Yeah, in the 1830s, I forget Stone, I think it was Barton Stone or something, I forget, but it was Alexander Campbell, a Northern Irish Presbyterian. 1830s, I think it was. He came to the American frontier and found that there were all these competing sects trying to, basically run the show, as it were. So he wanted to basically begin a union movement that would bring all these churches back to what he considered New Testament Christianity. And he believed from his reading of the Bible that they had frequently held communion, which was not common. Now, he didn't believe in the real presence, all right? He believed that the bread and the wine were somewhat more than symbolic, but certainly not transubstantiation.
They're present in memory and in hope?
Yeah, that too. Yeah. And so he did figure that should be the basis of the weekly service, which it is. The churches that came out of his movement, several of them, that they differ in various things. The more quote-unquote conservative are called the Churches of Christ. And then the more liberal Disciples of Christ. Then there was another group, the Christian churches. They merged with the Congregationalists in New England and formed the Congregational Christian. Anyway, so they believed that they were restoring the New Testament church. There were no bishops. There was no real hierarchy. One of the areas where the Churches of Christ, the Disciples of Christ, argue is that the churches really are congregational and independent, whereas the disciples are a denomination. So, but they all are vaguely called Campbellite. I think that should do it.
Okay. All right. I was raised to believe that the New Testament church apostatized into the Catholic Church when it became the state church of the Roman Empire. At this point, when bishops and dioceses were created, this ceased to be Christ's church and became the Church of Man or the Pope. This is believed because the Church of the Bible only constituted autonomous congregations with no overseeing bishop or diocese, and according to St. Paul, had multiple elders who were not consecrated priests. How do I explain to people that this apostasy never happened and that this recreated New Testament church that I was brought up in is nothing but a fantasy, and that the Catholic Church is and has always been the one true church?
Well, the first thing you have to point out is that the scripture they rely on is itself a product of the Catholic Church. And that was after 300 years after Constantine. It was in the 600s that the canon of Scripture was finally established. So, if they're really going to go with that, then they should need to re-examine for themselves things like the Gospel of Thomas, the Shepherd of Hermas, the books of Enoch, and decide for themselves whether or not these are Scripture. But see, of course, if you blow the canon of Scripture as received, then you blow the Bible out of the water. Because it itself is the product of what they consider an apostate church. So,
wow.
Yeah, so there's a little problem there. However, you can introduce then the church fathers, who are witnesses to what was going on in the early history of the church. And there you will see that the Catholic Church of today does not vary in anything of importance from that church of that time.
Okay. His last question. The denomination I was raised in also forbids instrumental music. This is taught because there's no authorization for it in the New Testament, and that the early church did not use instruments. I know this is true and that instruments were not used in the Latin Church until the Middle Ages. I also have heard that the church fathers did not approve of instruments, and neither did St. Thomas Aquinas, and the Orthodox Church still has their liturgies a cappella. Why did instruments begin to be used in the Latin Church, and how can this be justified?
Well, for starters, David played the zither before the temple, as someone reminded me of recently. I don't want to point the finger at anyone, Vinny. So yeah, you can do it yourself. That's fine. Beyond that, I don't think it's fair to say that the church fathers condemned instruments. They certainly condemned the kind of instruments that were used in pagan worship.
Like
drums,
what? Drums.
Drums and things like that. But again, it's up to the church to regulate its music, just as it was up to the church to establish the canon of Scripture. One of the things that the church's adoption of organs and so forth has done, which goes back to the 800s, incidentally, one of the things that did was that it allowed the church to get through the Black Plague without,
needing a full choir.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this was a big problem in Eastern Christendom, which they managed to overcome, but it wasn't easy. So no, it's not something I'd be bent out of shape about. The problem of the canon of Scripture being established by the church is much worse, because all Protestant bodies that rely on sola scriptura, including the Campbellites, you blow the Bible out of the water, you have absolutely nothing left.
Okay. We have 4 questions from Mr. Fugu.
Oh, the man of the fish.
Yeah. What is Charles's view of Tiki culture? Is it pagan, or is it acceptable for a Catholic to be a part of it? Is it respectful of the culture or cultures on which it is based? Lastly, if Tiki culture is acceptable, would the unapproachable powers that be at Tumbler House consider making a monarchist and or Catholic-themed Tiki mug?
Wow.
I actually don't know what Tiki is at all, other than the Tiki room at Disneyland where the birds sing. Which I like a lot.
At the Tiki room, at the Tiki room, where the birds sing words and the flowers croon. At the Tiki room.
That's one of my favorites. That was a really cute little thing they have at Disneyland.
You like the birds?
I do like the birds.
You wouldn't take a BB gun to them.
That's horrible, Charles.
I'm just asking. I take that as a no.
No.
Good. What a terrible thought, shooting a BB gun at the birds of the Tiki room. That's terrible.
That is. So, tell us about Tiki culture, Charles. Sounds pagan.
It sounds pagan because the Tikis are, of course, the various deities in the Pacific. But in World War II, a lot of American servicemen, including my dad, went to the Pacific. And they went to Hawaii and Samoa and the Polynesian Islands and fell in love with the Tiki motifs, And then they had various people like Don the Beachcomber and Trader Vic come back here, not here, but come back there to the States, to the continental States, and do Tiki-themed bars and so forth.
That restaurant that I liked a lot that closed down, was that Tiki? I forgot what the name of it. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, the Bahuka.
The Bahuka.
That was Tiki. That was so Tiki.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
That was deep Tiki. You remember a friend of ours who had problems with Tiki freaked out there.
What? Why would you have problems with Tiki?
I didn't. He did.
I know, but why?
It's a long story and a weird one, and I don't care to go into it. But suffice to say that he had problems with Tiki. But no, the Bahuka is uber Tiki.
Yeah.
Good. The Tiki Thai bar in Hollywood is, well, you guessed it, Tiki. And these are all sort of Hawaiian themed, usually offering Chinese food and rum drinks.
Yeah.
Zombies and Mai Tais, especially Mai Tais.
Yeah.
And that, that's the islands, man. What is it? The song that the Beach Boys came up with, Kokomo.
Oh, right.
Although that's all supposedly in the West Indies, but in the popular mind, the Pacific, the West Indies, the East Indies, it's all islands,
Yeah.
The Philippines, Trinidad, yeah, man.
That's
On
like
the beach.
those are literally on the opposite ends of the earth.
I know they are, but in the popular imagination, they get fused.
Wow.
They've all got parrots and monkeys in their jungles. I mean, come on. Who can tell the difference?
So why does he say should Tumblr House consider making a monarchist and/or Catholic-themed tiki mug? Like, what's?
I'm getting there. The question is first it was Tiki Culture
Yeah.
pagan? Well, the Tikis, of course, are pagan deities, but I mean, Tiki Culture, as we know it, is an imitation. It's a hash. I mean, it's like Aztec style stuff in Mexican culture. It just doesn't mean what it meant any more than the Christmas tree is about Thor. Only it doesn't even have to do with that. It's just a style now. However, you ask, is it respectful to the original culture? Oh no. And that's precisely why it's not pagan. If it were respectful of the original culture, I might have some qualms. In other words, if you were really worshiping Thor when you brought that tree into your house on Christmas Eve, I would have problems with it. But you're not, so I don't.
I see. Okay.
You're not emulating the Druids when you cut the mistletoe.
Okay. So
when you sacrifice a child to, that's different. Never mind.
So how do you make a monarchist and/or Catholic-themed tiki mug?
The only way I could imagine doing it, I don't know how you would. Well, you know what you would have to do is you have to take a tiki mug that somehow had the image on the one hand of Father Damien, and on the other hand of King Kamehameha the First.
You know, I went to Damien High School.
Yeah.
So that's our saint.
Well, you know where did he work? He worked in Hawaii.
Yeah, Molokai. Yeah.
So
yeah.
I could imagine a tiki mug with his picture on it.
Yeah. That's a good one. That's a really good one. Yeah.
And I could imagine a tiki mug with King Kamehameha the First on it.
Was Kamehameha Catholic?
No, but that's monarchy.
Oh, that's monarchy.
If you want to go Catholic, the interesting thing is the Hawaiian royal family are Catholic now.
Okay.
They started out, of course, as pagans. They converted to congregational Christianity. Then they became Episcopalian. And then after they lost the throne, they became Catholic.
Okay, next question from Mr. Fugu. I'm starting to suspect that the issues of modernism and the sexual revolution have roots in the Enlightenment. How can we as Catholics effectively subvert and destroy or uproot the fundamental evils of the Enlightenment from society?
I don't know.
That's $1 million question, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is. I have no idea. You tell me and we'll both know. I mean, knowledge is power, they tell me. So I suppose knowing that is a help. You've got to begin to root out in your own mind the spurious things brought to us in the Enlightenment. But of course, I have to admit that there are things that went on during the Enlightenment era that I'm all for. Rococo comes to mind.
Yeah.
But it's I don't know. It's difficult.
This is one of the first things that I think is involved with Catholic red pill. You know what I mean? Like, this is one of those things where you're starting to look at the broader world and history, where we've been, and trace how we got to here, and you say, wait a minute, whoa, the Enlightenment, okay. And so that seems to be where Mr. Fugu is here.
So he's getting red-pilled.
He's getting red-pilled. He's in the process of getting red-pilled.
We don't want red pill poisoning.
We don't want red... No, that's too much. That's... Yeah. So just moderate doses, But there are some arguments against the Enlightenment that are plain to see. Because we've done the Enlightenment experiment and we see the fruits of it. Like, with Kant...
We're living them.
We're living them. I mean, Kant's whole ethics... We live based on Kant's ethics, which
means we all live in our heads, totally independent from everyone else.
Yeah, are there universals? Can you get to a universal ethics without reference to God or religion? And he believed, yeah, you can. Everyone can universally agree. Now, to be fair...
Everyone can universally agree, although no one can be assured of the existence of anything outside themselves.
So, but to be fair to Kant... At that time, perhaps it might have seemed more reasonable, where you don't have the same ills as you do now. I mean, obviously, it's a grave error. I'm not. I don't.
Yeah, no, it's a grave error, and he was a brilliant man. Although, errors done by dimwits generally don't go very far. The thing is with Kant, with Locke, with Hume, Hegel, with a bunch of thinkers from the 17th, 18th, early 19th centuries. You have this idea, this quote-unquote idealism, which makes the ideal more real than the real. And it's ahistorical. So, for instance, if you look at Hobbes, you look at Locke, you look at Kant, you look at all these guys, and you look at their idea of the state. They all have this totally ahistorical notion that sovereign individuals gathered together and decided to, basically to mutually give in their power to the state.
Yeah.
That never happened. That's not how countries came about. It's totally made up.
Well, I guess that's what I was kind of getting to, is that this is theory, and now seeing the fruits of this theory, if these philosophers could and say, oh, okay, wow, by universal consent abortion is legal everywhere, maybe, like, oops, I was wrong. Because I wouldn't think that these people, at least in general, were in favor of abortion back then. I think they would view it as barbaric. And so,
I think a lot of these fellows would have. I think if they could have seen where their ideas were leading them, as you say, they might have felt rather differently to it all.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, they'll never get that chance.
Yeah. So. Okay. So I guess we're not going to even try to answer the question, like, how do we...
Well, I don't know what to tell him. I mean, obviously, this is something I've been wrestling with my whole life. How do you get people to see the danger of it? Well, you identify what's wrong, and you do your best to get people to see it. Well, how do you do that? You write about it. You speak about it. I mean, and of course, you point out the concrete applications of these things. I mean, the influence that they had, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, abortion, everything. But there is not a simple, easy answer to the question he asks, and so I can't give it.
Okay, I'm just going to try to reach for something on this.
Make everybody good.
Something. Is philosophy involving natural law, would that be some sort of antidote?
No, sure, it'd be a partial antidote, because, of course, Kant and the rest of the Enlightenment deny natural law.
Interesting.
So they deny anything They deny any pre-existing order to which all men must submit themselves. They deny the transcendent. But it's hard enough to get people to see that that's wrong, because that's the world we've come to live in.
So were they naturalists? Like what? I mean, were they materialists? You know?
In a sense, except that for them, for a lot of them, and certainly for Kant, the material world was not as real as what's in your head. And we see that today. We see the bastard reflection of that is in the whole gender issue. I think I'm non-binary, therefore I'm not.
That's very true.
That is Kantianism done by a cray-cray.
Okay. Well, I guess the best we can do is just live our faith according to order and principles. And
I don't got anything else.
That's all we can do. It's just one error. I mean, how do you peel back how do you roll back any of these errors? You know what I mean?
Well, in the end, what's going to happen, I think, is that we're simply going to have to ride this pony till it dies. In other words, as we are beginning to see now, the consequences of these false ideas will, in all likelihood, have to play themselves out until their wrongness becomes so obvious that even those in charge of society or those who succeed them realize it. And
okay, let's. You immediately reminded me of a related question. We've got a couple years back. It was a very interesting question relating to the lifespan of very big heresies.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Remember that? That was a good one.
Yeah.
Where the questioner seemed to find the trend that heresies die out. Each big heresy, it took about 500 years to die out.
Yeah, I remember that.
And so we're kind of there in terms of Protestantism.
Yeah, but we're not there anywhere near there in terms of the Enlightenment. If we gave it a 500-year, let's take 1720 as the starting date of the Enlightenment.
Okay.
1720, 1820, 1920. Yeah, we got a good 2020. We have a good 200 years left.
I guess what I'm sort of railing at or hoping against is that you seem to suggest that it's going to take a catastrophic end, whereas perhaps the decay of Protestantism it's not catastrophic in a sort of physical war, social, gosh, I don't know if I want to say social disruption or social disorder, because we have abortion and all these other things, but it's not like rioting.
Not yet. But, for instance, if we start having rioting because of the economic downturn, which is shortly going to drop on us, would that be a part of the process? Maybe. I don't know. Who's to say? We'll find out.
You're a historian. You're supposed to do better with projections. Can you, you're supposed to be able to come up with a model.
I would be accused of fortune telling.
This is how we operate now. So,
fortune telling?
Yeah, fortune telling. But instead of saying fortune telling, we come up with these models, and you need to trace you need to come up with a graph, and it doesn't need to be accurate, and you can change it every single day if you like, and that's what we'll abide by is your model.
Okay, all right. In 8 years, James Franco will be elected president of the United States.
Wait, what? James Franco?
Yeah.
Wait, the actor?
Yeah.
How'd you pull that out of your hat? Why James Franco?
It's a computer model.
What do you know, James? I'm just curious. What do you even know James Franco from?
What do you mean?
What movie have you seen
He's
James
going to
Franco?
be president in 8 years. Why wouldn't I know it?
Okay.
You seem very confused. All right, I ran the computer models on the best available data, and our computer projection shows James Franco as president in 8 years. Why is this such a difficult thing for you?
Okay. You know what? I'm gonna roll with that. But we're
Now,
gonna give you the yeah.
If the computer models change over time, then it may be someone else who's president 8 years. But right now, it'll be James Franco.
Okay. All right. Next. So okay, we'll close with that to the issue. Well,
Vice
we don't know
President
anything.
Madonna.
Okay, come on. Come on.
What? That's the computer. That is what the computer models show us, is that Madonna will be vice president, James Franco will be president.
Is Madonna Canadian?
No, she's an American.
She's American. Okay. You guys
She's
are
half
related,
French
though.
Canadian.
For those who don't
we are
know,
related.
there is literally a family tree on the internet, on some random internet page, that connects Madonna to Charles Coulombe.
Well, that's because we were cousins.
What a strange world.
What? That she and I are cousins?
Yeah.
Why is that wrong?
Because you guys are literally as opposite as it gets, other than your heritage, I guess.
You think I'm not beautiful?
Oh, Charles.
You think I wouldn't wear one of those iron cup bras, huh? You think I wouldn't do that? You think I'm not crazy enough to pull off something like that? Well, maybe not.
All right, moving on.
All right. So we're going to neglect my cousin as vice president. Fine.
What is something that Charles has changed his mind about with respect to the faith or monarchy relatively recently?
Madonna as vice president. No. Nothing. I mean, my views were formed a very long time ago, and nothing. I mean, I formed them on the basis of what I thought I knew, and nothing I've encountered or studied since then has led me to consider me wrong.
I see. So you're closed-minded. You're rigid.
Yeah, I'm rigid. I'm rigid. You know, I ran some computer models. You don't sound interested at all in my computer models. You really don't. You think I'm a fraud.
I would never say that.
Ah, well, that's good. Here at the Center for Concern, we're running what?
Okay.
Well, you know, we put out the annual Transparency Watch.
Okay.
Well, you should know. You've had to pay us. I mean, I mean to say, you've managed to avoid being put on Transparency Watch.
I don't even know what is Transparency Watch, Charles?
You really want me to tell everyone? All right, I will. Every year, the Center for Concern issues Transparency Watch, which is a listing of companies, government agencies of any government around the world, churches, civic organizations, civic groups, veterans organizations, NGOs, that, in the opinion of the Center for Concern, are not sufficiently transparent in their activities. And so this is basically, in other words, in terms of transparency, in terms of sustainability and accountability, this is basically a hate group list. This is what it comes down to. Because as far as the Center for Concern is concerned, Any organization that is not sufficiently transparent according to our standards is in fact really a hate group.
So you're a shakedown artist.
A shakedown artist?
Yeah.
We are providing an important service to the American public.
Give me money or I'll smear your name.
No. The very fact that you make a generous donation to the Center for Concern proves that you're sufficiently transparent to avoid being put on Transparency Watch.
Oh gosh, you know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of Donald Sterling, the owner of the Clippers. Everybody forgets about this. Remember how they ousted him for being a racist?
Yeah.
NAACP gave this guy awards.
Oh, I know.
Because he gave millions of dollars to the NAACP, and they showered this guy with awards.
They showered him with awards.
And everybody forgot that.
He had mistresses of every conceivable ethnicity. The man was not a racist.
Gosh. Anyhow.
Donald T. Sterling, he was actually one of my favorite LA characters,
Why is that?
Well, because he obviously wanted to appear respectable somehow. So what he would do is he would take out full-page ads in the LA Times of himself with various third or fourth-rate celebrities at these things. And it was always basically Donald T. Sterling receiving the Donald T. Sterling Award from the Donald T. Sterling Foundation. And it was always written in this clunky, not quite right lingo. You know what he was trying to do, and you thought to yourself, is he trying to save money by doing his own PR? Because that's not smart. Because it was clunky, and I want you to know that the Donald T. Sterling Corporation was never on Transparency Watch. As far as we were concerned, they were completely transparent.
That's great to know, Charles. I'm glad. Yeah, I'm sure he's received several awards from the Center for Concern.
Oh yes, he collected awards. He was always getting an award from somebody, and it was they'd have names like that. And he'd have this big picture of himself with Vanna White or whomever, giving him the award.
What a sham. What a
sham. Wait a minute. You're talking about black tie dinners.
Yes.
Yeah. Rich, nutritious meals.
What does that have anything to do with it?
Well, hardly shams.
All right, moving on. Gosh, we're starting to get derailed. I'm a little nervous for this.
All right, what do we got?
For this. Yeah. Okay. Final question. How much do I have to pay for shipping if my order at Tumbler House is more than $25? Whoa.
Let's answer that question.
$0. You pay $0 if you order for all orders. Over $25. U.S. residents only. Satisfaction guaranteed. Limited time offer. Operators are standing by. Act now. Void where prohibited. No CODs. Sorry.
That's right, Steve.
Steve.
Vinny, whoever you are. I keep forgetting. I always had to say Steve in the original ads. Gosh, that takes you back. Tumbler House has come a long way from those late night ads.
Yes.
That's right, Steve. Those are great days. It's a ad. Of course, in those days it was $15. Because we've only with $15 any order, free delivery. That's right, Steve. Oh, and it was on black and white TVs then too.
Well, for you.
Well, yeah.
Okay, so no, but he says more seriously.
Oh, I thought we had the thing wrapped. All right. What has he got?
If you were to synthesize the Catechism of the Council of Trent and the Catechism of the Catholic Church together into a single work that draws strictly on the strengths of each, how would you go about doing that?
Well, what I would do is I would take the Council of Trent, the Trent Catechism. Firstly, anything that where in the Catechism of the CCC disagrees with Trent, we'd knock out whatever the CCC says and replace it with Trent. The areas that they both cover, I would give precedence to Trent. But there are a lot of areas that Trent does not cover, and the CCC covers them very well. Plus, there are areas that they flesh out a bit with stuff from the Eastern Rites and so on, and I would retain that. So that's how I would do it.
Can't you get more specific?
Ooh, I'd rather not.
No, okay, well, how about in terms of where the CCC, the additional
contradicts?
Things? No, not where it contradicts, but where it adds stuff.
Well, yeah, sure. A lot of the social issues in the church, a lot of moral issues like abortion and so on, things like that simply weren't a question when Trent came up. All that stuff's very solid.
I see. All right.
The only real problem, as I say, is in a few strictly doctrinal and unfortunately a couple of very basic things.
Yeah.
They contradict Trent, and there I just knock them out.
Okay. Let's see here. Okay, question from Ross. Taking an objective view of the sort of monarch, leader, mother, and person that Queen Victoria of Great Britain was following the death of her husband, how she withdrew from public life, and how dreadful and petty she was towards her children and her duties, how does Charles feel she fares compared to the perhaps much more dignified and grounded monarchs of Europe at the time? Does she receive undue credit for the British industrial, cultural, and scientific advances of the time?
Well, I think it's important that we bear in mind that we know things about Queen Victoria that none of her subjects really did, or very few. We have 20/20 hindsight. Even at her most withdrawn period, she was the widow at Windsor and was seen, symbolically, she was a very, very powerful figure and inspired a lot of her subjects in all of those different fields you mentioned. Even A.E. Houseman, a Shropshire lad, the poet, he did a lot of things like that. I remember one of his poems had the line in it, "Get ye sons like your fathers got, and God will save the Queen." So, I mean, as a symbol, she was very, very powerful. And bear in mind that this is true of a lot of figures. It's true of popes. Most of the failings of most of the popes have not been known to most of their subjects. But it didn't matter. It was what they were as symbols that inspired people.
It seems to be dodging. You seem to be dodging.
I'm not dodging. I mean, was Franz Josef better than Queen Victoria? You bet. But in terms of how much credit Queen Victoria should have for these things, I'd say a goodly chunk simply because of the role she played.
As a symbol?
Yeah.
That's it? That's all you need is just be a symbol?
Let's put it this way. It depends on the job. I mean, if you're a shoemaker, it's not enough to be a symbol. You've got to make decent shoes. But a huge part of the monarch's job is to be a symbol. In fact,
how do you do that? Like, what does that mean? Like, so how do you be a good symbol?
You carry yourself with gravitas. You don't do anything that obviously contradicts the nature of the office. I mean, if Queen Victoria, for instance, had run away with some page boy very publicly, the way the Crown Princess of Saxony did. Not that I'm naming names. You avoid that kind of, or like George IV, who was very public with his mistresses and so forth. Edward VII had a lot more discretion. People didn't know about him. George IV did not, and then people did. So an important part of that kind of a job is doing your best not to do anything publicly that eats against the symbolism of your office, even if that's not how you particularly feel. And so, where Queen Victoria deserves some credit is when she finally left mourning. Because she didn't want to go out of mourning. She didn't suddenly start becoming active again because she felt a desire to be public. The thing is, she was crushed by the death of her husband, absolutely destroyed. You see, she had a very unpleasant childhood. It was not presumed that she would be the queen, not at all. And through a combination of deaths and so on, she ended up as queen at 17 or 18 years old, very much under the thumb of her mother, whom she didn't care for, and yet now she's queen. What do you do? Initially, her prime minister played the father figure, Lord Melbourne, but then she meets Prince Albert. And Albert encourages her to be herself, to be more independent. And she thinks the world of him, absolutely the world of him. And they form a very, very domestic couple, which was in huge contrast to her two predecessors. And then Albert dies. And he was everything to her. So she collapses. I mean, he had had such a huge part in helping her establish an independent identity. And then he was gone. So what does she do? She becomes the widow at Windsor. And this goes on for, 20 years, was it? 10 years? Long time. And eventually it gets so bad that her son, with whom she has a terrible relationship, she blames him for the death of his father. She's convinced to come out into public once more. And it is agony. She doesn't want to go out in public. But she spent the rest of her life doing things she wasn't keen on doing. Because that was her job. That was her role.
Okay, so let me sort of restate what you said in question form, perhaps. So she gets credit because she had good manners, made good personal decisions, and overcame personal obstacles. And because that vaulted her into a symbol, she deserves to get an era named after her and all the credit for the greatness of the British Empire.
Yeah. Right woman at the right time. I mean, the very fact that her subjects adored her. Gotta bear one thing in mind. They had something going for them that we don't. We have 20/20 hindsight into her problems, into the difficulties that she presented to her children, into all sorts of other things. But we weren't alive then. The very fact that her people idolized her should show you that she was doing something right.
I feel like something is not adding up in my mind here. There seems to be an inconsistency or something. So, I mean, is that really all that's required to be a good ruler? I mean, I don't understand.
No, it's not all that's required. But in terms of doing the job that she had to do, we got to bear in mind that the British monarchy as we know it is in very, very much the product of the American Revolution. George III, who was Victoria's grandfather, had attempted to regain the sort of monarchy that Queen Anne had had. with the king acting as a mediating force between the parties and so forth, and actually be more powerful than the parties. He failed. Now, there were two results from that failure. The one were the United States. The other, well, and also Anglo-Canada and Sierra Leone. The other, and the Bahamas. The other was that the British Constitution kept going further along in the direction he had attempted to stop. It became more and more under the control of an oligarchy. And that oligarchy had two major factions. Now, it fell to Queen Victoria to be a symbol of national unity at a time when national unity was becoming ever more threatened. When the issues that plagued Britain, industrial welfare, colonialism, whether to have an empire or not, the rise of the urban proletariat, the Irish problem, all of these things, any one of them by themselves, threatened to derail British progress. And through it all, there was the Queen, serene, seemingly, living up to the role and impressing everyone with how she lived and what she lived through. Don't forget, too, that she had the good fortune to live a long time. She was queen from 1837 until 1901. That's a long time. And similarly, here in Austria, Franz Josef was Kaiser from 1848 to 1916. Now, Queen Elizabeth, now reigning, has been queen since 1952. Think about what that means. The year before my brother was born. This is not going to be called the Elizabethan age, for which Her Majesty may feel very, very lucky. I wouldn't want to have this time stuck on me. But when she came to the throne, her prime minister, Winston Churchill, and think about that. Queen Elizabeth's first prime minister was Churchill.
That's wow.
Wow, indeed. He talked about the beginning of a new Elizabethan age. Well, as I say, she's lucky they didn't stick her with the name. But as with Victoria, so with Elizabeth, she has become a major advisor to her prime ministers. Why? Because she's seen things none of them have. After Tony Blair, they've all been born while she's been queen. Think about that. Now, think about us. Since who was president in 1952?
Eisenhower.
Truman.
No? Oh, Truman. Okay.
Truman, Eisenhower, JFK, LBJ, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, Bush 1, Clinton, Bush 2, Obama, and the Trumpster. All them presidentes in the time that Elizabeth II has been queen. And she's met all of them and talked to all of them. The prime ministers, since she was queen, have come and gone like nobody's business. It was the same with Victoria.
I guess I have a deficient or malformed mentality on this because, or approach, because you look at some of these complex decisions that some of these other rulers had to make, and these really tangled, complicated things that they have to navigate to. Perhaps I myself was viewing a ruler as a kind of chess player, putting the right pieces strategically in matters of state, and perhaps that's what I was looking for with this Victorian question, is what pieces did she move in matters of state that generated the greatness?
In that kind of monarchy, the constitutional monarchy, it's not the queen who plays chess. Okay. It's the politicians.
Okay.
But what the Queen does is make sure the board doesn't get pushed over.
She do that?
Well, several ways. One is simply, again, this depends to a great degree on the personality of the Queen or the King. And mind you, the constitutional monarchy of this sort is not my idea of a good time. Okay. But it's what she inherited. It's what the job was. So basically what you have to do is you've got to be a focus of loyalty above parties. In other words, at any given time, the prime minister of the day is going to have a huge political opposition, the other party. Okay, so what are the other party loyal to? They're not loyal to the prime minister of the day, and they'll do anything they can to get him out. Well, the problem with that is that there are, despite being so politicized as we are now, there are interests that are beyond politics and that somehow have to be maintained. The military is one of these. Now, of course, it's a political question how much you're going to spend on it or where you're going to deploy it. Those are political questions. But the reality of the military and the military's willingness to fight for the country, that is a separate deal that's above politics. And that's why in the British and Canadian, Australian, etc. systems, the soldiers and politicians and everyone else, they take an oath to the Queen. They don't take an oath to the Prime Minister. They take an oath to the Queen because Prime Ministers come and go, whereas the monarch remains.
What does the U.S. President take an oath to?
The Constitution, which, as you know, is like the Oracle at Delphi and can only be interpreted for us by the 9 wise people of the Supreme Court. I myself took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States from all enemies, foreign or domestic. If I took that oath literally,
go on.
Let's just say there may not be too many people left alive in Washington, or I might be dead. So, whereas bearing true faith and allegiance to Her Majesty the Queen and her successors, that's a little more tangible.
That's true.
There's a person there. And that person, even though they're not really running the country, they have a heavy, heavy, heavy burden. It's interesting, for instance, in the case again of Queen Elizabeth, I think we mentioned this on a prior show. In 1965, when Rhodesia declared independence, the then Prime Minister, Harold Wilson, was really keen to invade Rhodesia with the British Air Force and Army. Well, the problem with that was that for a lot of people in the British military at the time, the Rhodesians were their brethren. They'd fought in World War II with them, in Korea, the Berlin airlift. And there was a real danger that if he sent the army into Rhodesia, they wouldn't go. So the Queen pulled him aside and said, Mr. Wilson, I don't believe this is a very prudent thing to do. I think that perhaps other non-violent ways ought to be sought out. We'll never know exactly what she said. But when he was finished with her, when she was finished with him, all the interest in invading Rhodesia had got out of him. Now, that's why I say the irony is that while in law the Prime Minister advises the Queen, the truth is the opposite. The Queen advises the Prime Minister.
You know what you reminded me of with the talk of taking an oath to the Constitution? It reminded me of my favorite segment of last show, where you were asked about what monarchs have you met, and you gave the wonderful story of King Kigeli. And part of the point of answering that question was to illustrate how monarchy engages the emotions.
Well,
It is personal. And I think this discussion with swearing an oath to the Constitution compared to swearing to the Queen or the King is just light years different. I mean, the feeling.
The feeling is
no
different.
one really cares about. I mean, the Constitution, as we said, is everyone's plaything. There's no actual respect for the Constitution. With Roe v. Wade, I mean, that shows us right there. We'll do whatever we want with it.
Yeah, and yet that's the Constitution. In the American mythos, the Constitution actually takes the place of the king. But it's a deaf, dumb, and blind king who's completely the slave of its ministers. Now, the queen really pretty much has to do what her ministers tell her. Justice in Britain is administered in the queen's name, but she has no control over it. What her views are of anything political are anyone's guess. She doesn't vote. Neither she nor the members of the royal family vote. And they have to do everything they can to avoid appearing partisan. So this has been very difficult sometimes. When in 1932, was it 33, the first Labour government in Britain, King George V had to make a socialist prime minister of Great Britain, and he wasn't happy about it. But he did it. Very often these people have to sacrifice their own views of things.
Isn't there sort of a moral obligation sometimes, though? I mean, what is lost and what is gained here?
Well, see, there you come into the realm of prudential judgment.
Yeah.
Britain, let's put it this way. If you look at the history of Europe, you'll see one monarchy after another fell because the monarch refused to give in at this point or that point. We consider them, and I think rightfully, heroic. But were the results very good? What the British monarchy as it currently exists has been is something entirely different. Myself, I admire James II far more than I could any of his successors who actually occupied the throne. But the argument could be made that James II, in the end, and I say it could be made, I don't say I hold it because I don't, but it could be made that James II would have done his country a lot of good had he been more like his brother. But, we consider his brother something of a scandal, and himself a martyr to conscience. But would Britain have been better off under King James staying on the throne despite not getting everything he wanted, or having what happened, Dutch William coming over? See, these are things people are going to argue about forever.
I see. So you're saying it's like a tactical deference where you defer to this, to perhaps a socialist being prime minister, because if you didn't, it might go poorly for you.
Well, it's not just for me.
Yeah,
for the whole
not
country.
just for the whole country. I mean,
yeah. I mean, it's sort of like mutatis mutandis. Remember, he did win the election.
Yeah.
And there is this myth that people are very much in love with called democracy.
Yeah.
Now, I'll give you another example of a king doing something which we could discuss whether or not he did the right thing. That was 1946 in Italy. King Umberto II was deposed because of a plebiscite that everybody knew was rigged. So the chiefs of the military said to him, Your Majesty, everybody knows this thing's a charade. If you, call a halt to it, and we will We will subdue things, and you can go on as you have. But the king thought, quite possibly correctly, that if he did that, there would be a civil war. Now, Italy had just come through World War II. And so, King Umberto did not think that the throne was worth Italy going into a civil war, especially not on the heels of what they'd just been through the 3 preceding years. So he abided by the plebiscite and he flew off to Portugal. Now, the argument could be made that Italy would have been a lot better off had he stayed and had they fought that civil war and rooted out the enemy, root and branch. Well, maybe. But that was his decision, and it's important to bear in mind that he didn't look at the Italians the way a president would look at them, but the way a king would look at them. Did he want his people suffering and dying again for his crown? As I say, in the long run, it might have been better had he fought that civil war. But I'm not in the position of having to make that decision.
I have very little historical knowledge of anything, but the more
very few people do.
Yeah, so I'm quite pathetic on history, but the little that the more that I read up on history and see history, it seems like in older times, rulers would get tough decisions wrong more often than not. They're faced with tough decisions, and sometimes they make a mistake, but it was a tough decision. But it seems like nowadays there are easy decisions, and they're just stupid. It's just, what were you thinking? And whereas perhaps back in the day that wasn't the case.
Well, let's just say that when all the statesmen you're dealing with are smarter, and when you yourself are smarter, and when your subjects tend to be smarter, well, what happens is that things as a rule aren't quite as stupid as when everyone's dumb.
Okay, so you're saying, see, I was actually looking for confirmation from you, because that was my impression off my little reading, that this is the case, that, these are tough decisions like 100 years ago and such, and now there are easy decisions that we're fumbling around with.
Well, I don't know that's entirely true. I mean, you're right, I think, in some ways. Part of the problem is that a lot of the easier decisions, if you've got a moral code, they're not a problem. They're not even a question.
Yeah.
But if everything is on the basis of expedience and self-advantage, then that makes even simple stuff hard.
Oh.
It's easier to tell right from wrong than it is to tell what's going to benefit me.
That explains it.
And if you take away right from wrong, and mind you, human beings being human beings, right and wrong and advantage, those two are always present in everyone. But if you take right and wrong away completely, and all you're left with is expedience, well, then it gets real hard.
I guess that's it. I guess that explains everything.
Well, you get rid of a moral code, then all you've got is self-interest, but self-interest is hard to read because it's shifting constantly.
Oh, wow, there it is.
What's going to do me the most good this second as opposed to tomorrow?
Wow. Okay.
And I mean, poor King Umberto had a terrible choice. Another example of a man who was really screwed over badly was King Leopold III of the Belgians. Now, you'll remember him in 1940, Belgium, France, Luxembourg. All right, well, the Queen of the Netherlands, the Grand Duchess of Luxembourg, fled. Yeah. They ended up going to Britain, forming governments in exile.
Yeah.
the way the King of Norway did, the King of Greece, King of Yugoslavia. So they're in exile.
Yeah.
But the King of the Belgians stayed behind. Now, he was commander-in-chief. Remember, he's a constitutional monarch, like the British king. But he's also actually commander-in-chief of his army. Now, his father, in World War I, had stayed with the army, although the Belgian army had been pushed to the very further edge of the country. And he was there on the front. He shared everything with his men, like Emperor Karl or King Victor Emmanuel. And so they called him the Night King because he was such a brave soldier. So he dies in 1934. Leopold, his son, becomes the king. And he is as devoted to the military as his father is. And this you often see in monarchies because your troops have sworn an oath to you to die for you. So you'd have to be kind of a nasty, brutish kind of person not to take a deep interest in their welfare. All right. So Leopold III is commanding the troops. The Germans come pouring in, and then they smash through the French, through the Ardennes, and cut the Belgian, French, and British armies off from France. And the evacuation of the British and the French was Dunkirk, which you've heard of.
Of course.
But the Belgians had no place to go. So King Leopold III surrendered. And he stayed with his army. And then after it was over, he and his wife were kept in house arrest for the rest of the war. Now, this allowed a lot of communists and socialists to spread the idea that he had been pro-German, which he was anything but. But after the war, he had been taken away to Germany by the Germans as they took away a lot of other people at the last minute. So he wanted, of course, to return and take up where he left off as king. But the communists and the socialists were opposed. And Belgium was literally split in two over the issue of the king. So he decided in the end that his effectiveness was destroyed because he couldn't act as king of all the Belgians. So he abdicated in favor of his son, King Baudouin. But what a terrible thing. Unlike so many of his critics, he was actually at the front during the fighting. And he shared his men's privations in the camp afterwards. And then he was under house arrest. But lesser men, who had gone through very little in the war, they were the ones who decided that there was no way he should be allowed to return. That's justice for you, isn't it? That's real justice. And that, mutatis mutandis, it's like here in this country, in Austria. The Archduke Otto, the head of the House of Habsburg, heir to the throne, spent the war in Washington convincing President Roosevelt that Austria was as much a victim as Poland or any other country, Czechoslovakia or whatever, and that as a result she should have her independence restored after the war. And that is the reason why there is an Austria today. Contrary-wise, when his three younger brothers, graduated from university in 1944, he sent them into Austria to fight with the resistance. And that's where they were when the Axis were defeated, risking their lives fighting the Nazis. Meanwhile, Karl Renner, the worthless leader of the socialists, who had the socialists vote for the Anschluss in 1938, who tried to collaborate with the Nazis, but they wouldn't accept him. But they had thought so little of him, they didn't even arrest him. So he spent the war living in comfort in Vienna. Well, when the Soviets invade and take Vienna, he writes Stalin an obsequious letter offering his services, not realizing that Stalin was looking for him because he knew he could use him. So Stalin makes him Chancellor of Austria. First thing he does is have the Habsburgs expelled. And then an election is held. The socialists lose, so Stalin insists to the other Western powers who are also occupying the rest of Austria that Renner be made president. And so Karl Renner was president of Austria until he died in 1950. And all over this country, you'll see streets and squares named after him. Yeah. Most people don't know their history, because if they did, they wouldn't be ruled by the kind of people that rule them.
Do Austrians share your sympathies on this, or are they just out to lunch?
A chunk of them do, but you see, the media and people like that will accuse anyone who points this kind of thing out as being a fascist. Oh, well, you must be a fascist if you're opposed to Renner.
Well, isn't the alternative communist in this one?
It's
since Stalin appointed him?
It's just crazy. I'll put this another way. Look at Mayor de Blasio of New York.
Let's not.
No, we will. We're going to look him in the face.
Okay.
He was working with the communists in Nicaragua. He calls himself a Marxist. Don't people realize that the communists killed more people than the Nazis? How could they possibly elect a man like that? Well, why weren't de Blasio's opponents shrieking this from the housetops? Well, how come?
Because it's all meaningless theory. It's just theory. It's not real life.
No, real life is being confined to your house. Oh, I'm sorry, that came out wrong. That's the whole point, and you've hit your nail on the head. People are ignorant, and they are expected to make grown-up decisions. The vote of a World War II veteran is the same as a streetwalker.
You've got me fired up, Charles.
I didn't mean to.
Gosh.
And thank God we don't have literacy tests, because they're racist. Thank God there's no ID for voters, because, if someone is too stupid to be able to get himself an ID, he deserves every right to vote as much as anyone else. And you're a racist because if you don't think so, because by definition, blacks must be incapable of doing that. That, to me, when I hear the opponents of ID for voting, my only thought is they must think blacks are very stupid people. But here's my question. If they're right, and blacks are too stupid to get voter ID, why do we expect driver's licenses out of them? Why do we expect ID when they go to the bank? Why isn't that racist?
I don't know, Charles.
I do. The founders claimed that the United States would only work if it had an educated electorate. Our current rulership prefers as big an electorate as possible, regardless of its ability to read or even think. One can only presume that they derive some advantage from it. Usually people don't support things that they don't get an advantage out of somehow. Especially today, when we've banished right and wrong from the issue. And it's just a question of what benefits me at the moment.
Okay. That was a really good discussion. We touched on a lot of new and interesting things there. So thank you for that, Charles. That was really an educational experience for me. Okay. The last question for today is from Covington.
Wow, the city or a person?
A person. A question for the Kabbalistic and Hermetic, as he is so called on Twitter, Charles Coulombe.
Well, let me say a word about that. Firstly, the vast majority of people who call me Kabbalistic and Hermetic don't really know either the Kabbalah or Hermeticism are.
I do. They're bad.
Yeah, okay. That's nice. What are the Sephirot?
What?
The Sephirot.
Did you just make that up to try to make me
No.
appear foolish?
No, I didn't.
I don't know. What is that?
It's the Sephirot are the grounds on the Kabbalistic tree of life.
Whoa, you're into all that? That's
I'm
a lot of knowledge.
I know about that.
Whoa, wait a minute.
There's more. What's the Emerald Table?
Emerald Table? I don't know. I don't care. I'm not
Well, you should.
into these things, Charles. Like
well, you notice I don't call people Masonic unless they're admitted members of the order. You know why?
Why?
Because I don't know enough to talk about it intelligently.
You seem to be talking about this pretty intelligently.
Because I do know a bit about Kabbalah, but I'm far from being a Kabbalist. And I know a bit about Hermeticism, though I'm far from being a Hermetic. But that having been said, I will make this assertion. Those who call me a Hermeticist and a Kabbalist are very possibly themselves Thelemic and Sodomitic.
You use different adjectives when you were talking about this. You were like...
I did. I was annoyed then. I've calmed down.
Oh, okay. Okay, you've settled down your adjectives, even though I don't know any adjective you said. Well, I can guess the second one, but yeah.
Sodomitic? Yeah, but Sodomitic is kind of necessary if you're going to be the first.
Huh.
Thelemic.
Okay. Well, we'll just leave it at that. Anyhow.
No, so just so you'll know, ladies and gentlemen, if you're on Twitter and you see somebody calling me a Kabbalist or a Hermeticist or an occultist or something, bear in mind the person who's doing it, other than living in their mother's basement, in all likelihood is Thelemic and Sodomitic, based upon the amount of knowledge I have of them, which is quite as much as they have of me.
Do you enjoy logging on to Twitter?
I don't really enjoy it, but I have to do it.
I've been debating in my mind about... Because...
I don't mean I'm compelled to do it, as in I've got this compulsion.
Yeah.
I mean, it's bad enough keeping up with Facebook. Twitter is just an added annoyance. But the problem is, if you're a columnist, as I am, your editors inevitably think it's a nice thing if you play on Twitter from time to time, every day.
I'd like to see an interesting discussion on the... I don't want to say ethics, but... Gosh, this reminds me of another question that we had where a person was saying that technology lends itself to a certain direction. It has an intelligence of its own. Because I feel like Twitter lends itself to a not a good direction, because everybody's sort of floating into this angry, confrontational way where they talk and they communicate in a way that is totally divorced from how they would communicate in real life.
Well, that's true. And, the funny thing is, as you may remember, I guess a couple of Christmases ago, there was a person on Twitter who took it upon themselves, themselves, to go on a crusade against me. This is a person I had never met, didn't know anything about. Then I found out about the person, and actually became rather sympathetic because of this person's story.
Yes.
Well, we've become sort of kind of Twitter friends since then.
I've been watching it.
Well, when the person in question says something that I'm all for, I'm always happy to like and sometimes retweet. But what do I do when they do something I don't agree with?
You ignore it? I don't know.
Yeah, I ignore it. Why do I have to fly into a rage at anything I don't like?
Because we're being taught that like CNN and Fox. Those things are. It reminds me, what is it? The Minute of Hate in 1984.
Oh, yeah. The 2-minute hate.
Because Tucker Carlson, every night, it's like, okay, so for the next minute, we're going to show all these liberals saying outrageous lies that you're going to hate, and it's going to ruin your night, but this is what we're going to do, and this will be the talking points for tonight. And I'm sure CNN does the same stuff. Yeah. And to me, that's teaching hatred, to be honest.
Well, it's certainly dehumanizing, and where, as I said earlier, where it's certainly showing its limits is this whole pandemic thing, which has been completely politicized. I mean, it's, as I said earlier, if you believe that that the lockdown is necessary and is justified, then obviously you're a flaming liberal. And if you think it isn't, then obviously you're a hidebound fascist conservative. Well, what gets lost in that is whether or not it's really necessary and to what degree.
Yeah.
It just gets completely swallowed up in this political fury that's swallowing everything up.
But I don't. There are other things at work in Twitter, and this is from a self-analysis of my own behavior on Twitter, where you look at yourself, you look at what you're tweeting, and underneath it all, especially when it comes to Catholic Twitter, the context underneath it, so many messages, is get on my level.
Yeah.
Get on my level. You're saying something and you're proving a point or whatever, but underneath it all, you're feeding your ego. It's, well, get on my level, Oh, I'm encouraging you, blah, 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 but you need to get on my level. And I had to purge myself because I myself was doing this. I was caught in this trap, and I didn't like this about myself. And it's horrible.
I hate to say this, but my Twitter interventions are primarily retweets.
You see, I enjoy looking at your Twitter because you don't do what I've just talked about at all.
It's too much time.
Yeah.
But I enjoy retweeting different things, and then I did get kind of a crack at one of the great things about Twitter is that like the entire internet is that if you know how to do it, you can translate anything.
Yeah.
So, I'll see things I really like in all these outlandish languages that I don't speak them, but I can read them straight away.
Yeah.
And but really I started laughing because I retweeted a Croatian retweet, Croatian commentary and retweet of a Portuguese retweet.
Okay.
I was able to read both of them because, you push translate and I read them.
Yeah.
But I just thought to myself, gosh, this is neat.
Yeah.
To be able to retweet for an English-speaking audience a Croatian retweet and commentary on a Portuguese tweet.
It's pretty cool. You're very good with that, Charles, in finding the good that technology affords us. Us normal mortals get caught up in these traps. And so I don't know, I just want to I just wanted to express how tough it is for everybody, to escape this. And it makes me wonder about the program itself when it lends itself that you have to fight so hard against your better self. I mean, against your worst self, excuse me, that,
Well, it helps if you're lazy.
Helps if you're lazy.
That's how I do it. Yeah, it helps if you're lazy. Because there's no, it just, I've had people say to me, I admire the way you stay out of fights and all that. It's just because I'm lazy. I don't feel like it. I mean, people get very uncivil and so forth because they've got a certain amount of anonymity. But it still takes a lot of effort to carry on one of these. I saw something interesting. Again, I hate to bag on my opponents, but oh gosh, what was it? Oh, I did a podcast with somebody else online.
You two-timing?
Yeah, I know. It's
I'm
sad.
joking. No,
There
I'm
it is.
happy. That makes me happy. If anyone who wants to interview Charles, please interview him. I've always felt that he needs to jump to higher venues. So please, anyone who wants to interview Charles is very available.
I like that. Charles is easy to meet.
Charles, yeah. I just realized that I'm basically pimping you out right now.
Yeah, that's exactly what you're doing. But that's okay. I mean, wait, never mind. But but seriously, the thing that made me laugh was that this one person, I won't mention the name,
yeah,
but in the comments, anybody who said something nice about me, this guy would say, well, did you know he's a Feniite? Yeah, but did you know he's an occultist? Yeah, but did you know he's this? Yeah, but did you know he's that? I mean, it was incredible. It was this long laundry list of my sins, and it was not quite apropos to anything. And I looked at that and I thought, gosh, that guy must have a lot of time on his hands sitting in his mother's basement.
That's just sad because I know the restlessness that it's a lot of idle time that creates a restlessness and obsessiveness, and that person, it's just, you're not a happy person when...
No. And of course, the whole cult of fault finding and jumping on stuff, which, why?
I used to do that more, and it is exhausting.
Of course it's exhausting. I mean, I hate to quote the Christophers quoting the Chinese, but it really is better to light one candle than to curse the darkness. It really is. And again, that's a phrase. Somebody earlier on asked, have my views on religion changed? Only that I would never have quoted that before, ever. But certainly my online experiences have convinced me of this, that, jumping up and down on stuff, finding fault over minutiae that nobody's going to understand anyway. And I mean, if you want to correct something you consider to be incorrect, do it politely.
Yeah.
And for heaven's sake, if you're going to do that, don't simply attribute it to that phrase that should be ripped out of everyone's tongue. I heard that. I heard that. So if I say, I don't know, Queen Victoria was a nice lady, and someone says, oh yeah, well, I heard that she yelled at her cook. Okay, that's nice. Where did you hear it from? Number one, why is this so important to you? But presuming that it is, I mean, and the injustice done to Queen Victoria's cook by Her Majesty shrieking at her, and I presume she was shrieking. Number one, why is it important to you? But if it is important to you, you heard it. Where'd you hear it from, pal? Don't do that. Well, I heard that, you know what? I heard it too. I heard you're a moron. That's what I heard.
Now.
Well, it annoys me.
I know.
It really does. I heard that. Ladies and gentlemen, don't be that guy.
I'm going to try to leverage this into...
Don't make me angry. Don't make me so angry I want to break some...
I'm just going to leverage this quickly into something spiritual, because these struggles that I myself have and that Charles has, it shapes my prayer life because I want to be free of these frustrations. So... two of my favorite prayers is the St. Francis prayer. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there's hatred, let me sow love. Where there's injury, let me sow pardon. Where there's darkness, let me show light.
Let me seek not so much to understand as to be understood as to understand.
Exactly. And so I always say that because that's gosh, it just is such a remedy. And also the litany of humility that I say, because from the desire of being loved, deliver me, Jesus. From the desire of being praised, deliver me, Jesus. From the fear of being calumniated, deliver me, Jesus. From the fear of being ridiculed, deliver me, Jesus. These are all good things to pray for. I don't want to be feared in this way, and I also don't want attachments to these things. I don't want my happiness, or excuse me, I don't want. Yeah, no, I don't want happiness attached, contingent on other people.
I don't want a contingent on my being an internet personality.
Yeah, so these are two things. If anyone's struggling with these things, I recommend this. So to help you try to make progress, to be free of these frustrations.
Now, what was our friend's question anyway?
Yeah, sorry, we've got so sorry. I'm sorry, Charles. That was such a big topic for me. Okay, Covington asks, what role did the forest play in the ethos of the medieval Europeans? Did it carry a dark and sinister tone in the same token as the Romans who ventured into pagan lands and Puritans in North America? Or was it more light and mystic, akin to fairy lore and Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream? Or was it a mix varied by locale?
The latter. It was a very perspicacious Covington. It was a mix, varying by locale, varying by amount, and also by historical accidents. So, for instance, in areas where, for instance, you had invasions, wars, oppressions, or whatever, the stories of people taking to the forest to escape and leading a free life, ranging from Robin Hood out in Sherwood Forest to here in Hungary. There were various stories about the Bakonyiwald, the free life of the forest. It varied. It varied tremendously. The forest has always had a double-edged attraction for man. On the one hand, it's deep and dark and frightening. But on the other hand, there are wolves and all sorts of strange animals there, and possibly demons and all the rest. But it's also the home of wondrous animals. It's a great place to go hunting. It can be beautiful. I mean, not unlike nature itself, in general. We have this dichotomy with nature. I mean, nature fell when we did, and with us. And so it's not perfect. And it is by turns. I mean, there's the word sublime. You know, when you look at a waterfall, it's beautiful, but also threatening. The same is true of lightning, you know, of a lightning storm. It's impressive, it's amazing, it's astonishing, but you can also get zapped, and so it's scary. Well, the forest is like that. It's got this double edge, and not just in European folklore, but universally. And then, of course, the peoples that lived in the forest, and there were some, charcoal burners and people like that, had their own peculiar ways of doing things and were seen as peculiar and partly in with their fellow man and partly allied to the other, whatever that other was. You see the same thing with the sea, actually. You know, in folklore, the sea is both benevolent and malevolent. The mermaid who could either fall in love with a man and want to become human, or lure him to his doom. Actually, if you think about it, the opposite gender is that way too. Both enticing and threatening.
I love the imagery of the forest, and a lot of these images that I at least imagine medieval folk and before had I feel like they offer spiritual advantages that we don't have because they ultimately evoke humility.
Huh.
You go out into the forest, it's dangerous, you're subject to the force. You go out on the road, there could be robbers there that could kill you. There's no 911. There's no
No.
safety there. See, we're so safe and sheltered that we've lost this concept of danger and sort of we feel immortal. You know,
We feel immortal and we feel protected. I mean, even before the pandemic, we felt like nature really couldn't do too much to us. And every now and then we'll have something like this or an earthquake that shakes us up, quite literally if it's an earthquake. A tidal wave, tornadoes, hurricanes, things like that. But by and large, we feel we pretty much got nature under control.
Yeah.
Our medieval ancestors had no such delusion. And they were, well, you know, one of the great stories of the Middle Ages regarding the forest, which I love, is the story of Saint Hubert, who was a Frankish nobleman, and he just went hunting constantly, loved hunting. He went hunting on Good Friday, and he chased a white stag. Well, in medieval stories, if you got a white stag on your hands, believe me, you're this close to pushing over into Fairy or worse. But he comes riding up to it, and the stag has a cross between its antlers, and says to him, "Cease thou from doing evil and turn to good." And so St. Hubert became a priest and then a bishop, the Bishop of Liège. But to this day, the deep, dark woods where he loved to hunt, the Ardennes, the town of Saint-Hubert is there with his relics. And he's still the patron of hunters. And you know your favorite drink, Jägermeister.
Not my favorite. I make a joke of it, but yeah.
Oh, I thought if you didn't have absinthe for your morning cereal, you'd use Jägermeister. Well, all right, never mind. Anyway, you remember what their symbol is? Saint-Hubert's deer.
Yes.
Because Jägermeister means hunt master. So, and the other thing too that's interesting is that from the forest we've gained a whole mythology of free livers, of well, what the Germans call Jägers, what the French chasseurs, the Italians cacciatori, as in chicken cacciatori, yes. What we English speakers call riflemen. It's a kind of soldier, light infantry, basically. If you remember Sharp and all that, the riflemen wore green.
Okay.
All of these have some connection to the spirit of the forest, of the hunt. And these were, in origin, hunters who were as light infantry joined an army that needed long-range shooters, you know, snipers, as it were, and people that could go into forests and other places without rangers the same way. You know, the U.S. Army Rangers and the Special Forces.
Yeah.
They have the same mythos. You know, and also a bit of the whole notion of the Indian doing the same thing. That's why you know, in the United States Army, the symbol of the cavalry is the crossed sabers. The infantry are crossed rifles. The artillery are crossed cannon. But the special forces are crossed arrows.
I never seen that one.
Well, my brother wears it. He's special forces. And that's why they wore a green beret in the first place, and claimed a certain descent from Rogers Rangers in the 7 Years' War. All that kind of thing, men living off the land, off what they could hunt, what they could shoot. It's a very powerful psychological hold in the mind. And similarly, when you're touching on monarchy, the monarch always was held to have a close connection to the land, which is why they generally went in for hunting. And one of the most pathetic things I know, you know, Prince Charles is a great hunter, and he taught Princes William and Harry to be hunters. There was a big to-do in the paper. Oh, it's just so terrible. Oh, gee willikers, I could spit. When each of the young princes were blooded. That means when you have your first kill, you get blood on your cheeks. And this was just terrible. How could they do that? These little urbanites in their newspapers, who've never been out into the forest. Well, where does this all go? Prince Harry, as you know, married one of America's finest women. And he's given up hunting because she told him to. It's good to see we're having an effect. And it's interesting because the anti-hunting thing in itself shows the complete separation between modern man and nature. And it's ironic because the very people who are anti-hunting do so because they think they're doing something for nature. And there's a very sad irony there. And it's sad because the only reason why in Europe we have wild game at all today, or these beautiful forests, is because of the hunters. Otherwise, the things would have been eaten a long, long time ago. And it's funny, I'm in an area now that's surrounded by forests. I mean, not a quarter mile from here. I'm off in the woods. And the deer and the wild boar are all over the place in this part of the world. So when the hunting season comes along, there's venison and wild boar on every menu in every restaurant because there's so much of it. And there are no predators. The wolves are coming back here. That's something that's been going on for the past decade in Europe, and people are not quite sure why it's happening. The wolves are once again multiplying in Europe. And they were the major predator and for the most part wiped out. So for a long time, the deer and the boar just kept on spreading. Well, the problem with that, of course, is that when they overpopulate, they starve to death. There's nothing worse than starving deer in winter. And so, in all of these places where hunting is no longer permitted, you've got a huge problem. And that is, you either have to cull, which is not pleasant, the deer and so forth, or you'd have to reintroduce predators, which would be very difficult to do. You really can't do it in a suburb. So
coyotes are coming up here big time.
Oh, they are, and there's no way to stop them without hunting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and see, because people are so removed from nature, they don't understand that the hunt is the most natural thing in the world.
Yeah. Well.
And the forest, to go back to the original question, the forest represents all of this. Even the very things we as moderns don't like about the hunt. It's savagery, it's unpredictability. Those are emblematic of the forest. The other interesting thing, about hunting is that it has its own set of laws, what people don't realize. So, for instance, if you shoot a deer, and it goes, especially if you're doing it with arrows or something, but even if you just shoot it with a rifle, and the thing goes rushing off into the woods, you are morally obligated to chase after it and put it out of its misery.
Wow. I did not know that.
Well, people don't know that, you see. This is what I mean. Modern people are kept ignorant by their masters and then they think on the basis of what their owners have told them. Hunting's so cruel and mean. Well, it is cruel and mean in the same sense that life is cruel and mean. But if you remove human beings from the thing, you're still going to have hunting. And the fact of the matter is, and mind you, I'm not a hunter. When I was younger, I did a little bit of it. I did a little bit of fishing. I haven't done either in decades. That I'm hardly likely to start now. But I do know the value of it. and I do know the important part it's played in civilization. One of the terrible things today, is that fathers don't take their sons fishing or hunting. My dad would take me fishing. I was no good at it. But that really wasn't the point. The point was I was getting out into the woods with my dad. Well, you could do that if you didn't go fishing or hunting. You could, but it's not the same.
I'm not a hunter, but I am a huge fisherman, and my dad took me fishing many, many times.
Well, I mean, there's nothing quite like catching your own breakfast.
No, there's
Waking
not.
up in the morning and knowing, well, you don't have to eat.
Yeah.
And that, of course, my dad always did the catching, but I can remember saying, no, but Dad, we didn't bring any food. And he said, well, yeah, that's why we've got to catch the fish. And he said, of course, there are the worms, if you'd rather you try those. And no, that's not. What? Well, but no, it's, so in all of these things, if you stop and think about it, starting with religion and going down through monarchy, through family life, down to things like hunting and fishing, we're just so totally removed from everything that our ancestors were. And it's not as though any of this stuff was perfect. That's not my point at all. But we live in a world of our own imagining. We had an earlier question about the Enlightenment. We live in the ideal of the Enlightenment person. We live in Kant's idealism, divorced as much as we possibly can be from real life.
Yes. I'm afraid that's true.
And I don't want to get all Jungian on everybody. And certainly Jung had a lot of what's the word? Shortcomings. But where he was smart was in trying to figure out the human being from the basis of how human beings really are. He looked at their folklore and their religion and all that and tried to see how that was reflected in the human psyche and how it reflected the human psyche. Very, very different from our friend Sigmund Freud, coming up with an all-inclusive theory of sexuality which would explain everything in the human mind. And yet notice that of the two, Freud is the dominant one. And this goes back to what I'm saying. If there's anything not even completely right, just not completely wrong, we have no use for it as good moderns. We always cleave to what's just totally wrong. Again, that doesn't mean the alternatives are completely right. All they have to do is be part right for us to reject them.
Okay. So, we have a book of the week today. Very famous book, Dark Night of the Soul. I feel this
St. John of the Cross.
Yes, I've started reading this week. I feel this is a very timely book because
a lot of people are going through it.
I feel, it sort of relates because many people have lost access to confession, the Eucharist. There is a spiritual dryness, perhaps, there.
Yeah.
And I forgot which prelate said this, but perhaps we're fasting in this sense, in this way. And so that is what the Dark Night of the Soul deals with. It deals with a spiritual dryness, a sort of purgation of the senses of the spirit. There are two dark nights. There is kind of one for newbies and beginners.
The Dark Night of the Senses.
The Dark Night of the Senses, which I wonder if I've been feeling some of these. I feel like after reading this book I have. And then there's the Dark Night of the Spirit, which is awful and terrible, which various saints have gone through. I know St. John has referred to Job. He referred to David when David is repenting from, and who else has gone through it? I hear a lot, and I've seen these quotes that Mother Teresa went through a horrible dark night, an absolute horrible one.
Apparently so.
Awful, 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 awful. And that is sort of purgation. That's sort of, you know how you go to the mass and there's sort of a satisfaction there, a very deep spiritual consolation. Well, this deals with absolute spiritual desolation. And so I recommend this book. This book is, I feel, people who feel like there's perhaps a dark cloud over their life right now or something. There's some sort of suffering, and perhaps it's this, and this can relate. Have you read this, Charles?
Years ago.
Years ago. Well, what do you have to say about The Dark Knight?
Well, I think that it's very, very important for turning those dry periods into spiritually useful ones. That is to say, St. John of the Cross points out that in, with, and under the dark night, all sorts of things are actually happening, and that God can be working in your soul without your being aware of it. And that's an important thing to bear in mind. And that ultimately these things, annoying as they are important way stations on the spiritual journey, on the ascent. Because one of the points he makes is that, and so does St. Teresa of Avila, is that the spiritual life is an ascent. If you're just going like this, you're not really doing anything. God forbid if you're going like this, well, that's not really good. But very often, you're not aware of your ascent. Sometimes, in fact, the dark night, either the senses or the spirit, in a sense, conceals the progress you're making.
Exactly, because you dwell on your own wretchedness, your own misery, and as St. John says, you don't feel you're accomplishing anything through it.
No, and if in fact if you weren't accomplishing anything, you'd be likely to feel you were. It's a great paradox.
It is.
It's it's sort of like the more you fear hell, the less likely you are to go there.
Yeah. And this sort of, for me, this was attractive for me because whenever a person is, whenever I'm suffering or whatever, I try to get out of my close, personal, intense, emotional perspective of it and try to get the bird's eye view from a third party of it. To try to see that my problems, in the grand scheme of things, perhaps aren't that big of a deal. That I'm making a mountain out of a molehill. And things like that. Sort of to reassure myself intellectually. And I feel The Dark Knight is a tool in that way. To have a very holy view of what's going on. A holy view from St. John of the Cross. It's a hard read. It's a very hard read. I have to admit. But I feel it's a very famous book for a reason. So this is I think this book is something like $11 or $12 in the Tumbler House store. Highly recommend it.
Now they bought that book, and they bought another like The Master's Folklore, or maybe Star Spangled Crown.
And it ended up over $25. They would get over $25, free shipping and handling at tumblerhouse.com.
Free shipping and handling, Vinny?
That's right, Charles. This is a limited time offer. So operators are standing by. Act now.
Void where prohibited.
Void where prohibited.
Not available in all areas.
U.S. residents only. Sorry.
No CODs.
No COD.
Ladies and gentlemen, we get a real kick out of saying those words. I don't know why. They're magic incantations from television past.
Yeah. Anyhow,
the days of counterchecks.
This has been another long episode. Everyone loves the long episodes, so I'm glad to be able to do this for you. If you want even more content, become a patron. We did another 50-minute patron pre-show. So if you just want to gorge yourself on Charles Coulombe content, become a patron.
Send money.
Send money, yeah.
In small, unmarked bills. No, the funny thing, there was a children's show host. I forget who he was. When I was a boy, I don't remember which one it was, and I don't think I heard the broadcast. It was very famous because it cost the guy his job. He thought it'd be funny, and he said, "And now, boys and girls, go to your mommy's purses or your daddy's wallets when they're asleep and take out a few of those green pieces of paper, put them in an envelope, and send them to your Uncle so-and-so at the address." Well, two things happened. He got inundated with envelopes of cash, and he got fired.
Dude, people do that for real now because there's a lot of streamers, like streaming video games and all this and that, and they always say, kind of jokingly, get your mom's credit card, because you can subscribe to all these people, and they say get your mom's credit card and subscribe, become a member. That's a real thing.
Oh gosh, I've lived too long. No, this is wrong. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's always been a lot of fun. Covington, I really liked the forest question.
Good.
But beware of them sodomitical Thelemites on Twitter. They're everywhere.
Yeah, so, okay, that'll do it. I know everyone has dysphoria over what day of the week. So I can safely tell you that it's Monday if it's off the menu. And the soul you save
may be your own.
See you next time.
God bless everyone.